It's hard to deny the influence that old-school Resident Evil and Silent Hill has had on the horror genre. Even if fixed camera angles and tank controls are a thing of the past, there's still so many games coming out to this day that try to capture that 90s retro horror vibe. It's not often you see games do this in the first person though, that is, until Nightmare of Decay dropped just a few days ago, created by developer Checkmaty. The game starts us off in our apartment. After hearing reports of women going missing on the news, we go to sleep only to find ourselves waking up outside a mansion. The first thing I noticed was the game's visuals. Instead of opting for PS1 era pixel style, it gives me the impression it could have been a low-budget, early PS2 horror game that's been lost to time. The textures all have a certain graininess to them as well, and it looks great. You come across a talking cat who tells you that you're one of many who've been claimed by the nightmare, and runs off before elaborating any further. After encountering your first zombie, you find a gun and a key, and with nowhere to go except the mansion, you enter the world of survival horror. Anyone who's played Resident Evil on the PS1 knows the drill from here on out. You'll explore the mansion taking down zombies as well as other monstrosities, find a variety of different weapons, and of course solve puzzles along the way. The progression follows a very similar format to the old Resident Evils as well. Solve puzzle, find key, unlock new rooms with said key, rinse and repeat until you get to the next major area. The puzzles manage to strike a nice balance between being accessible yet not insultingly easy, or insultingly hard for that matter. There's no dumb, abstract puzzle involving a pink rubber ball here, I'm looking at you Silent Hill 1. As long as you explore the mansion thoroughly, you shouldn't get too stumped at any point in this game. Some of the puzzles are very clear nods to other survival horror games too. Some subtle, like this clock puzzle being reminiscent of Silent Hill 2, and some not so subtle, like this key. This key is literally just straight up the key from Resident Evil 2. Be ready to see a lot more of this kind of stuff when you play the game. Everything from some of the enemy designs to the save points are nods to other franchises, so anyone who's a fan of retro horror will have an absolute field day playing this and noticing all the references. But it doesn't just feel like references for the sake of references either. Nightmare of Decay is a really solid game, made by survival horror fans for survival horror fans. The dev clearly has a passion for this retro era of horror, but still managed to bring a unique and fresh experience to the table, a balance that can be very hard to get right. And the music in this game is just great. Walking into the main hall of the mansion and hearing that foreboding, ominous music, I just knew I was in for a good game. Some tracks in this are genuinely really chilling too. Take this track for example. The music is so good, I almost wish there was more of it. Some of the areas have no music at all, instead just opting for the groans of the zombies to fill the silence, and while that can certainly be scary in its own right, I would have loved to have seen even more of what this dev had to offer in terms of music, especially after setting such a high bar. While retro horror games are very nostalgic, there's no denying that they have some outdated mechanics too. Something I appreciate about Nightmare of Decay is it knew what mechanics should stay in the past. For example, while you do have an inventory, it's not limited to just 8 slots like in the older Resident Evil games. I know some people appreciate the micromanagement that a limited inventory offers, and don't get me wrong, I enjoy it too for the most part. But there's no denying that having to run back and forth to an item box can get a bit tedious sometimes. I think it was a wise choice on the dev's part to do away with this mechanic and offer unlimited inventory space instead, letting you focus purely on exploration and immersion instead. But unfortunately, this game also introduced a mechanic that I just don't think works very well. You might have noticed the bar at the bottom of the screen. Yes, this game has a stamina meter, and I personally found it to just be a nuisance more than anything. You can sprint for a couple of seconds before you become exhausted, slowing you down dramatically before your stamina regenerates again. In the heat of combat, this can be a death sentence. I understand what they were going for, I really do. I can see how a stamina meter would add a level of strategy when approaching a swarm of enemies, but if it runs out anywhere near a zombie, you'll just end up taking a lot of unfair hits. Outside of combat, running down long hallways and having to constantly stop just so your character doesn't become exhausted gets a little bit tiring by the end of the game. The game already offers a really challenging yet balanced experience when it comes to enemy difficulty and resource management, so having to manage your stamina on top of that just feels a little bit overkill, in my opinion. I appreciate the dev trying something new with this mechanic, but I just don't think it gels with the gameplay very well. My only other complaint would be some enemy varieties can be rather unforgiving, namely the enemies with guns, but to credit the developer, they listened to complaints and recently patched the game, making them much less of a headache to deal with. Kudos to the developer for taking the complaints on board and acting on it so quickly. Despite the monstrosities you'll encounter and the foreboding atmosphere of the mansion, the game also has unexpected moments of comedy. You'll notice at times that the writing can suddenly become self-aware and very tongue-in-cheek. It feels like it harkens back to the early days of survival horror that often had unintentionally funny moments. I'm not going to spoil too much because I highly recommend just buying the game for yourself to experience it, but needless to say, it was a pleasant surprise to be exploring such a spooky setting only for the NPCs to sound like this. Your first playthrough of Nightmare of Decay will probably take you 3 to 4 hours, but the game offers a variety of extra modes you can unlock after that, randomizer mode, horde mode, and so on. The game also encourages speedrunning and challenge runs. If you pause the game, you can see your current time and other information as well. This is such a good touch and adds a lot of replayability to the game. You can buy this game on Steam for less than $5, and quite frankly, that is far too cheap for the quality content it offers. Anyone who enjoys retro survival horror, do yourself a favour and buy Nightmare of Decay. For the price, you just can't go wrong. This style of horror may be gone in the mainstream, but it is alive and thriving in the indie horror scene, and this game is a perfect example of this. I can't wait to see what else this dev has to offer. Yo, thank you so much for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly had a lot of fun making it. If you want more content like this, I stream horror games 3 times a week over on my Twitch, or you can follow me on Twitter if you'd like more updates regarding future videos and reviews. Thank you again so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.